Francis, appreciate you making time for this conversation. You've written some words on paper that came to my attention and stopped me in my tracks of like, who's writing this? What is going on here? And a friend was posting it, sharing in the group, like, hey, I'm reading this book. He's like, this philosophy, like this is what we're all about here. Because my group is like around training and life success and that kind of stuff. And just sharing these things, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I had to look it up on Instagram, and then I reached out, and here we are. So thanks so much for making time for a conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm super, I'm excited to be able to chat it up with you and go down some rabbit holes and all that good stuff for sure.
So you're in the mountains of Colorado. Is that has that been home for a long time?
Yeah, let's see. So I've been in Colorado, in total maybe 20 years or so. So a good long time. I was born back East Coast, what we call the Beast Coast of America. Then went out here for college, to go rock climbing, and basically has been out here with the exception of just like a stint to study philosophy back east. But I pretty much came back here as soon as I could. The mountains were calling, and had to get back here. Yeah.
Very cool. So the philosophy and climbing are your two things, and that's what you get to do.
Yeah, man, that's the stuff for me. So, I mean, I guess I should probably give a little background, like I've been climbing since I was around, 12 or 13, just, full on since then, love at first sight. And, whether that's just like trad climbing, ice climbing, boulder, whatever, I've just kind of really enjoyed all the disciplines and, just taking it really serious my whole life. And, so I've, been doing that. And then, I wrote a lot for climbing pubs and, I kind of started to like really feel the philosophy bug getting me. So I went to like grad school and studied philosophy, man, and just dove, head in and spent a lot of good years, just reading books and climbing and teaching all that stuff. But, and I'll bring it back to, the climbing books, but, I realized that like there was no really good books out there that started to think deeply about like athletes, especially like mountain athletes, from like the perspective of a mountain athlete. You know what I'm saying? From someone who's like in the game, who's doing it, who like loves it, and who sees all these connections between like weird stuff like architecture and climbing or dance, and parkour, gymnastics, surfing, all that stuff. And so I was like, man, I need to write that book. And it just ended up being, like the first thing I ever, the first kind of like longer thing I ever wrote. And man, kind of haven't looked back since. I've just found it really fun to like bring together, thinking and just training in the body, right, and sports and excellence. And it's been just like it's been a journey. I'm still writing about it today,
So is it because you're into philosophy, like the idea of writing a book was kind of present because you're reading so many books and thinking about the great thinkers of all time and what they put on paper? Did that plant the seed, or what like planted the seed of writing, actually getting your thoughts down and publishing as a book rather than just papers, I guess, for college?
Yeah, right on, man. So I mean, like the deep origin story, I guess, is I had this one professor, this guy named Ed Mooney, and he kept asking me. He was writing this book on sensibility and touch and sensation. He'd ask because he knew I was like a climber, and he's like, so like when you're climbing, like how do you think about your senses? And I'm like, well, you can't climb without all your senses. I mean, your fingertips, like the sensitivity of your fingers, what you're feeling, your balance, even your sense of smell. And he's like, all right, well, how does smell come into it? I was like, well, if you're on a big wall and it smells like shit, I mean, actual shit, that means you're en route, because it means people have been going before you and they've been taking shits on the route, right? So it's like, that's actually a good sign. And there's other ways like ice climbing, that like your sense of sound has to come into play when you're sinking your tools and all. He was just amazed by it. And I'm like, this is not amazing. This is just what climbers do. And he's like, you need to write a book about this. I was like, whatever, So he kind of planted the seed. And, for a long time, I just read everything I could, right? Like what is out there on athletics in the body? And I just realized it was so unsatisfying because either it was like, academics, no offense to academics like writing about the sociology of sport, which, talked about money and like, fame, just like kind of bull crap stuff. Or it was like people who study the body, but they weren't athletes. They didn't really spend their lives in their bodies, right? Like thinking, trying to craft, certain things. And so I realized like, hey, I can do both of this. I know the theory, I know the philosophy, but I'm also in the game. And so I was like, yeah, let me figure this out. And it was just like, yeah, it was a journey of writing. And the last thing I'll say about it is got some early some help from John Gill, who's like one of the founders of modern bouldering, brought chalk to the sport. And I sent him like an early draft, and it was like a pile of crap. I was like, John, what do you think of this? And he's like, oh man, this is great. This is really cool. He's like, I'll write you an intro. And I was like, all right, like that's all. Now I'm off to the races. So that's kind of that's the story.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's cool how someone recognizing, hey, that's really interesting, you should share it. Like,
yeah,
that can be such a turning point in people's lives when someone is like, that's really cool. And often we don't see the brilliance in our own past, our own experiences. Like everyone should be on a journey like that, I believe. Like there's something cool that everyone's done. Yours is definitely exceptional with like the dramatic nature of the rock climbing world and bouldering. It is like life and death, right? Like that is clear and present, that it can go pretty gnarly. Is that dark side like is that a big part of the sort of your experience of climbing as well? Like the fact that it can be the end.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, for sure. I wouldn't say so much in like bouldering, or sport climbing, but when you start to get into like, big wall like trad climbing, and some like dangerous routes, and especially ice climbing. Like ice climbing is just like always dangerous every time, I feel like. And you're constantly like looking down, like, okay, if like, if I fall, I die. Like that's just like 75% of the time, I feel like. But the public really latched on to the dark side of climbing. I feel like through Honnold's free solo and later the alpinist Marc-Andre Leclerc, who I've worked with these guys, and like the dark side of climbing really forces the conversation pretty quickly. And I wouldn't say that's like a romantic thing, right? It's not like we're out there thinking about death. I mean, what that question does is it just throws you to the present in like a very concrete way. And it says, okay, like if you make one bad swing with your next ice tool, like you are going to, widow your family. Right. And so what it does, it forces you to really heighten what your body's doing. And it's kind of the feedback loops that you're constantly having to make decisions based on like, the terrain and the environment and the sounds and what you're feeling. And so I think cumulatively over time, yeah, it does. It can dull you, like a lot of times to death, and like make you a little reckless because you just don't realize the situations you're putting yourself in. I feel like The Alpinist, that film with Marc-Andre Leclerc, I think, like we worked with him, we knew him. And that was a good example. I feel like he just kind of rolled the dice so much and he kept getting heads, and he just thought he was going to keep getting heads for a long time. And climbing does that to you. It kind of pulls the wool over your eyes a lot if you're not careful. And I'm not saying he wasn't careful. I think he knew what he was doing, but I also do think that he probably just didn't have the healthiest sense of his of like just really how dangerous, like what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I guess and then just coming back, big high level, philosophy, talks about death a lot, right? And mortality and all this stuff. And so, yeah, climbing is a sport, man. Maybe like big wave surfing or certain types of seriously gnarly kayaking that really, it just pushes you in that decision where it's just a constant conversation. We lose friends all the time. It's something we talk about there's not any of my friends that aren't kind of grieving in some way, in some capacity. And yeah, it takes a lot to get ready for some types of climbing. So you got to dig deep,
Yeah, that idea of getting ready is, I've prepared my background's preparing athletes for rugby and things like that. But if you're preparing for something that has higher consequences, then it potentially adds more to the preparation, or it's at least a different thought pattern underpinning of like, I really need to be healthy and able to perform the task. It's not just losing, but it's like even bouldering, like you don't want to be falling. You don't want to be falling from, 3, 4, 5 meters. You don't want to be falling
that's
badly.
right.
Like it's, even if it's not death, it's still it's still like high consequence, falling awkwardly. So the preparation side of things, like, are you really into your like strength and conditioning kind of like the science of the training? Is that a passion of yours as well?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, prepping for those situations it's kind of multifaceted, right? So you got to do as an athlete, you got to make sure like, it's feasible, like what you're going to do is feasible. It's like in your realm of possibility. I think that's like your base level. Like, are you reaching too high? And if you are, just back off, wait, train harder, wait a couple months or whatever, like don't do it. Right. So, I mean, I think if you can pass that first gate, like, okay, this is possible. Then it's like, okay, where am I exposed? Like what are, when you really break it down, when you start doing like a boulder problem, for instance, that's maybe 10, 20 feet off the ground, which is like a sure back breaker or a leg breaker, you got to be like, all right, usually there's a couple moves that'll stand out. Okay. So, and you really focus in on that move. And then you say, okay, like what's the percentage that I'm going to pitch off of this, these moves? And what's the percentage of me really getting hurt on each of those? So you kind of like, you really analyze it really carefully. And there's certain type of tricks you do. So I would say that's like the second gate. And then you start to role play a little bit, you start to be like, okay, like, let me try to visualize myself in this situation. Let me see like kind of what panic happens in my body, right? Like, if I get to the base and I'm like convincing myself, like, this is the go, I'm going to try to visualize, I'm doing a mock run, am I getting anxiety? Am I getting like, what's happening inside of me? Because, climbing is the type of sport where you can go from like happy-go-lucky, fun in the sun to just like palm sweating anxiety in like 3 seconds, super quick. And if you can't handle that shift, like with absolute precision, you are going to break your back. You are going to fall a lot and you're going to get hurt. And so that's the tricky one to work on, because, panic, I think climbers in general, deal with panic and nerves more than anything. And I don't mean like panic as in like the bigger sense of like, breaking down, but just the micro panics that your body undergoes that cause you to fall, like shaking legs or sweaty fingertips or increased heart rate. All of those things are kind of manifestations of panic and fear. And if you don't have those in check, then you just don't kind of belong on those things that are high consequence. And I think that's the hardest stuff to work on, like that's really because you got to know how you react. You really got to dig deep and figure like what's popping up right now and why is it popping up, and if you can't manage that, then it's going to pop up and bite you back threefold when it's game time,
It's like rock therapy. You exposed to yourself.
Yeah, I think so. I think it can be that. I think, one thing I'm trying to work on in the sport is like, hey, like we can use this in like a positive way. A lot of climbers just, you go out there and you just, you rip around, you do some stuff and it's pretty unreflective. And, you get some ego boost out of it and that's cool. Like whatever, like, go send some shit and have some fun and drink some beer and hang out. That's awesome. I'm guilty too, all the time. But like, why not use like the gifts of climbing for something a little bit more sophisticated, and why not also, get to be a place where you can climb your best? Because I don't think you can really climb your best if you're not doing that kind of work. The top climbers are all doing that work. They're controlled, they don't panic. They have all their shit together. And that's not a coincidence, right? It comes more easily for some than others, for sure. But they're all doing that kind of work,
Is the work getting to those situations or situations close to your limits? Like, is it that desensitization or is it stuff that they're doing? Like, is it meditation or off the wall? Like, what are you talking about there in terms of doing the work? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Good question. In a lot of ways, it's like it's kind of a resensitization, so you don't want to like desensitize yourself because then you can't really be aware of the things that are really going to come and get you. And for instance, like, Adam Ondra, who's like, the top kind of climber in the world, and, Alex Honnold, and you hear these guys like talk, right? And this, I guess I can talk a little about like flow theory and flow practice, because I think it's a little relevant. You kind of hear in that literature, right, that, climbers, the best thing to do is get into the flow and, shut your mind off and, just kind of let your body take over and so on and so on. And it's just kind of like romantic, transcendental, experiential thing that, a lot of athletes talk about. But I think it's kind of bullshit. I think that they're right in describing the state, but they're wrong in describing like how to get there. So for instance, like you can't just, go up to a cliff and be like, all right, I'm just going to turn my mind off and like try to get the zone state and climb like the hardest thing in my life. Like it just never, ever works like that. What they're doing is they're getting their base awareness and all their decision making. They're kind of bringing that down low to where it's kind of like automated, right? To where it's super optimized and efficient. And they're not having to like use up their precious bandwidth to think about shit. Like I got to bring my left foot up because if I do that, the underclink's here. And if I had the underclink there, then I can do, like, they're not thinking about all that stuff. They're allowing their body to make those decisions. And their mind is kind of like, on a lower level where it's just kind of idling there, right? So their bodies are kind of doing what they need to do, right? It's kind of well trained. They're not getting in the way of athletic performance, which the body does, the mind doesn't really do. And so I feel like the best climbers are able to manage that kind of awareness, intensity, kind of like spectrometer, right? Like I need to bring awareness here, bring awareness there. I need to really cue in here, and now I can drop off. And I feel like, almost all sports are like that, whether you're a basketball player or a rugby player. You got to have those moments when you're just running and just pure kind of animal, but then you got to be able to back off and really quick and say, okay, let me read the field. What's my positioning? Where are the other guys? And climbing's like that, and I think the work that they're doing is what you could call like toggling, right? They're toggling between different types of awareness or mentalities really quickly, efficiently, and, with intelligence. And so that's the kind of the work that they're doing, whether they know it or not. Some climbers talk about it that way, but you see it in action. And I think I'm just trying to like put some words around it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The art of putting words to something that's very physical is, that's a huge challenge in any realm. But the sport writing, as you say, like most of it's like, it's difficult to capture in strength training as well. Like people ask like, what are the best books? It's like, well, there's a few decent writers but like, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's easy to capture because it is such a visceral experience. Like what is it that makes it successful on the page?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that?
Yeah. How you get that across, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where philosophy comes in, right? And, philosophy is the art of like, for me, chipping away, like you chip away at assumption. So you're not like really adding to like, knowledge, you're realizing what you need to take away from your climbing, and I think that's like the key thing. I think good philosophy should kind of call you out. It should call out like your complexes and the weirdness that you bring to stuff and the distortions that you bring to stuff. And I think once you do that, you kind of like let people realize all the junk they're bringing to their sport or their training or their mentalities. A good, for instance, is be like, okay, you go climbing, you go to the crag, then you see a lot of people and they're getting super pissed off, right? They're just getting aggro and they're yelling at themselves and they're kicking their chalk bags or whatever. And it's like, you want to tell them like, bro, you're never going to climb hard in that state of mind right now. Like, so like, you're just like, no one really climbs hard with anger. Right. So why are you angry? And it's like, oh, well, I have like so much, personal investment, or I have so much, feelings of success and failure, leveraged on this climb that if I just don't do it, I'm going to go home and feel like shit for a week and, try to come back next weekend or whatever. So it's like, all right, we just remove that, figure out how to take your sense of self-worth out of this equation. And that will get rid of the anger a little bit. And then you actually be able to be calm and rock climb, and actually do the thing you need to. So you kind of like learning the art of stripping away, I think is really key, because one of the worst things you can do is climb from a state of confidence, overconfidence, or underconfidence, right? You need to be like right in the middle. If you're overconfident, you're going to botch it. You're just like, same with, rugby, you're going to make just like bad decisions. You're going to overcalculate, overestimate, or underestimate your opponent. And that's never good. And so, figuring out what you're bringing to each, like, athletic goal you're trying to do, I think is really hard, because that takes work. But I think a lot of the top athletes, actually, I know a lot of top athletes do that. I mean, they are very aware that, like, they're, what to bring to a climb or what to bring to like an athletic achievement is really kind of central to the equation, and whether you're talking to like Serena Williams or Michael Phelps, they'll always say that, like, you just need to focus on the performance. Like, you need to just focus. It's not about winning. It's not about like getting the gold medal. It's not even about beating that opponent per se. It's just about, I need to be able to do my best job. And what does it take to do my best job? I got to quit loading up all this stuff onto the table, so my body basically can do its thing, because the body knows,
100%. What influences outside of rock climbing? You sort of touched on surfing and other disciplines. Like, are you into other stuff? Do they influence your own practice?
Yeah, man. So I was a like competitive gymnast when I was young. I did a lot of gymnastics. That definitely, taught me a lot about like the core mastery component of climbing. Like, you have to really dig deep and kind of work through repetition a lot in terms of like going at it with a fresh mind all the time, because some climbing projects can take years, and you're just like banging your head against the wall. You got to not give up hope. You got to find kind of that micro, what climbers would call like micro beta, right? The littlest things, like a thumb here, a little shift of a finger there, will make the difference. And if you can't notice that and you're not open to like changing up, then, it's not going to go well. But, I think another sport that I did a lot that, I really liked, so, I grew up like skateboarding, right? And skateboarding is super interesting because it's actually a lot like climbing. It's a lot more like climbing than people think, like what you're doing, you're skateboarding, you're really kind of reacting to an environment, like when you're skating, you're always skating in a different sense of like a different area, different concrete. There's just different like things you're reacting to, and you're using the landscape as kind of like your prop, right? You're just kind of like, you're trying to figure out new things to do in the built environment. And climbing is actually a lot like that. I feel like you have to be supremely creative and just like adaptive to each like new place you go. And, I just got that a lot from skateboarding, I think, just in terms of like, okay, like what can I do in this one spot that's kind of, just allows me to like, feel good about the day or something like that. And so I think climbing's a lot like reacting to the landscape. I think kayaking, a lot of like non-field sports are really good about reacting to environments. And if you think about climbers, climbers you can't force your way up a climb, right? You can't be like, hey, I'm going to do it my way, and screw this climb because I own this thing. Like you can't have that attitude. You have to say, what does this climb want me to do? Like, how do I need to react to it? What does it want? What are the behaviors it wants out of me? And there's a lot of humility there. And so, yeah, I think I got that from skateboarding, definitely gymnastics. And I think that's an important part of climbing, that humility aspect, because yeah, it's just, you have to adapt. You have to like let go of forcing your way and learn to kind of read the field really carefully, in the middle of something when you're, coming back to panic, when you're panicking, like usually, there's always a way out. When you feel locked up in climbing, there's always like one kind of like thing you can do to make it better. And I want to credit a California climber, this guy, Hans Florine. When I was young, I took like a clinic with him. I thought I was like 14. And one of the things he said was like, if you find yourself stuck, do 360, look all around. And he's like, and if you can do that, most likely you'll be able to climb yourself out of any situation. And always remember that. He was right. He was totally right. He's a super badass dude. And I remembered that, from 30 years ago, and he was just spot on the money there. So you know.
It's a great belief to have, as well as it's a tool. It's a system of thinking, but it's also a great belief to have that there's always going to be a solution. When you get that instilled in your mind as a young climber, like that's a powerful spell to cast. That you're always going to find a solution. Like going up the wall with that in your back pocket is healthy. Are there other kind of secrets or spells, like things that keep you healthy on the wall, or like that you go to if, like that example of I can't find a hold? Are there others, like maybe with the fatigue, like as a non-climber and someone who's played around with, climbing parks, the idea of being very fatigued on the wall in the natural climb is sort of something that is confronting to me, thinking about what you've been through, or what climbers go through. Do you have anything else that really sticks as like this makes a big difference?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, I think climbing is a little unique, right, of a sport, in the sense that, like, I think no one kind of grows up and at age like 4 knows how to like throw a javelin or something like that. But you see young kids and they do naturally climb, right there. It's just kind of like there's a anthropological, sense in our body, but we lose that at some point. Like we forget that it's there, though, it land low in the brainstem. But you forget it. And what you see a lot with climbers, either just starting new or they're just kind of learning, is there's just a lot of stiffness in their body. And there's a lot of hesitation, and there's a lot of trying to do like too much too quick. And that's, you can talk about injury that way as well. But, what you're trying to do with climbing is develop like a deep repertoire of feeling comfortable in uncomfortable position. It's a lot like yoga, right? So when you do a climb, like when you see someone who's really good do a move, they're not going to shake. They're just going to look like really fluid, and their legs aren't going to sputter, and their arms are good. And then you've put like a beginner on it, and man, it looks rough. Like they just look like they don't know what they're doing. And so what's the difference there, right? There's a lot of like muscular memory going on there. There's a lot of strength capacities, but there's also just like a deep repertoire of movement that you need to, like a catalog that you need to develop. And I feel like that's like the base level component, right? I mean, that's kind of like what allows you to constantly change up and adapt. And I think, letting yourself soak all that stuff in. And I would say this even goes for pros and who just need volume days, like big days out. They're kind of doing the same thing. They're just kind of soaking up stuff. But especially beginners, when you're learning, just building that base of movement is really key, and just paying attention and trying to just stay focused on what your body wants to do in those moments. Because a lot of beginners and intermediates, they hijack their body with the way they think it needs to move. But most of the time, you just kind of naturally fall into position, and with in the more relaxed state, you'll climb a lot better. But that's a lot harder. It's a lot easier said than done. And I think it goes for a lot of athletics. Like you can give somebody like a new device or a new ball and say, do this one thing, and they're going to try to do it, but it's going to look a certain way. It's not going to look fluid. And you give it to a pro or a master, and they're going to be able to get so much more out of it. There's so much more continuity. I think just to get there's no short circuits to get to that point. You got to put in your time. And so that's kind of like, being receptive and being humble and just like feeling that stuff, staying present with the climbing. You'll climb twice as good, twice as quick, I would say.
Yeah. I love that idea of the catalog and expanding your catalog, your repertoire of like what positions are comfortable, because you can see that clearly with climbing. There's like where it goes to more overhangs and different hand positions. That concept generally, though, is one that I've wrestled with quite a lot, because it's pretty clear in the strength world that multi-sport athletes tend to do better as pros. So the kids that go to high schools where they practice a lot of sports tend to do better in college, and the kids in college who do multiple sports tend to do better as pros as well. It goes with injury rates, and obviously there's exceptions to that, like the Tiger Woods story and such. but maybe he's the most, maybe he was well-rounded physically. They didn't give too much away of what he actually trained with his dad as a young boy, but he's physically better than most golfers. Part of the reason why he probably had the impact that he had. But the research is pretty clear on that. And it's something that in the rugby world, what you see is players go from being 14, 15, 16, playing everything, dominating in lots of different sports because they tend to be strong, powerful kids because that's what you need for rugby. But that also serves in lots of different ways until you add a bunch of mass, and then you might not be as fast in athletics, and you might not be as streamlined in the pool, and you might not jump as high on the basketball court and all that stuff when you get heavier. But what I saw is a lot of athletes deteriorate dramatically in terms of their catalog through their career, and they get like a smaller and smaller range of things that they can do where they're still able to play their sport, but they can't get their shoes on anymore. They can't like touch their back. I'm exaggerating, but they're no longer good at football. They're no longer like good at soccer, at basketball. They can't swing the golf club like they used to be able to, or tennis racket. And it's like the catalog is diminishing. And oftentimes there's more injuries. I believe there's more injuries as a result. I believe often the spark in their game, the creativity goes.
Yeah.
That catalog concept is one that, is like, how do we maintain that catalog? How do we develop that catalog? In climbing, are there people that you've worked with or you've seen who's like, they pick it up faster because of a previous catalog? Like, would you say, when you touch on gymnastics, like I would imagine for you that would have given you a dramatic advantage, and probably skateboarding as well to an extent with, as you say, like spotting the terrain and balance and such, but more so gymnastics with the rings training, and you come to it with a catalog. Like, have you seen that? Do you see that concept as playing out in rock climbing?
Yeah. Oh, for sure, man. And I love your point about like kind of people that stay too narrow, you end up having these like burnouts or cycles of injury. I came across this interview with Wayne Gretzky, who's like, one of the most well-spoken athletes on kind of like deep inner creativity. And apparently, they interviewed his parents, and, he basically like played hockey a couple months a year and then just like threw down the stick and like did other shit like for a long time. And he really like didn't focus into one sport or like really take it seriously as like a young athlete until like super late, and then, the people who were like interviewing him brought it back to like a bigger conversation. And, they found that for a lot of top guys and women, athletes, was like, they found the same pattern, was that they didn't have this like super myopic training, like, where their parents are just grinding them out at age 6 and 7 and upwards into like one sport. They were free to explore. They play baseball, play rugby, football, whatever. And it was only later that they probably had that catalog of movement, to bring it back. And then they were able to kind of like funnel it all into that one sport, which enabled them to really move and develop new techniques, inside their chosen sport. Because I think that's what, great athletes really innovate in movement and technique. I mean, that's really what they're doing, like LeBron James or Jordan or rugby players. They have ways of just moving that just challenges people and puts them on their toes. And it's hard to react to that. And they're bringing something outside, to that sport. And, it takes a while for people to catch up. Eventually people catch up, but that's kind of just like how I feel like great athletes work. They just really bring something in new.
I love that. Innovation in movement concept is not something that, I don't know if I've heard anyone say that. But like, as soon as you said, like, I'm thinking back, because I've worked with world champion players in the rugby world, and they have different movement signatures that you don't see other people, other people can't do it. Like they literally move differently. One of the athletes that I work with, his name's Sonny Bill Williams. He's the most well-known rugby player in the world. He's actually just about to have a big fight against the UFC. One of the guys who's done best in UFC. So it's probably his most serious, highest level fight so far. All fighting's pretty serious if you're boxing.
Yeah.
But he has that movement ability in rugby that was very unique. And you see then when he takes it to boxing and just when he plays around, like his athletes like that, he's always like doing little dance moves or just messing around with the guys. there's something about the movement that's quite unique. Do you see that in rock climbing as well, where like I suppose there's just those unique positions? Like, is that what's happening? People innovate positions, and then others gradually try to move into those positions to catch up, execute the same challenge.
Oh yeah, man. In a lot of ways, I love that you mentioned boxing too, because I think boxing is such a great example of the way bodies move, and like, what like some of the mega stars. If you look at like Tyson's, like, his left hook or his undercut, like no one was throwing that punch with the way he was, right? Like no one could pull that off. But when he started doing it, like he would put fear in his opponents because they just didn't know how to handle it. They couldn't react to it, right? They just didn't have like the catalog to figure out like, how do I defend against this guy? And I'm pretty sure if you put like, think about like Messi, right? In football, what we call soccer, unfortunately. But like his movement patterns, the way he's cutting across, outside the goal, like he is moving differently. That is really throwing like traditional defenses off, and it's really hard to capture this guy because he's just, he's also unpredictable inside of his kind of, his niche there. But so yeah, I love that analogy. Boxing, I've written a lot about boxing. I love thinking about boxing too, because I think that the boxers actually have to react and have to have the same kind of humility as climbers do, because you got this plan, and all of a sudden your plan is gone because you just got hit, and whatever you thought you were going to do is gone. You got to think about what you got to do next. It's not about what just out, what's going to happen. It's like, what do I need to do now to survive, right? And climbing is very much like that. But yeah, in terms of like a movement signature, I loved how or a thumbprint. I love that analogy you just kind of created there. And if you look at a lot of the top climbers, the people that have always innovated, like a Wolfgang Gulick or a Chris Sharma, or like top guys, right, who've kind of like pushed the sport and really, people had to catch up. They always move differently, and they were able to do certain climbs and could really innovate in certain genres of movement just because they moved differently. And Adam Andra is currently like the top guy. And he has this crazy mix of just like ferocious power, speed climbing up really difficult things. But he also can just like really calm it down like really quick and just and fully, not get his heart rate up to like 120, even though he's kind of like hustling up some stuff that no one could do. Like he climbs so quick that it's just bizarre. Like it's weird to watch. It looks like you're watching in fast forward sometimes. And most climbers, even top guys, who can't even climb like that. They cannot climb that fast. And so what's going on there, is that kind of quickness enabling him to do some of the things that he's doing? Like, of course it is, right? And so, the way he's moving is starting to already affect another generation of climbers. They're already starting to look at that and be like, that's interesting. Like, how do we take that to the next level? Or how do we, like incorporate that into a training regime or something like that? And, Chris Sharma did the same thing, I feel like, with really dynamic sport climbing, which is like bolted and or bouldering. He just brought a sense of like dynamic power climbing that was probably just not really there. It was kind of there in fits and spurts, in the sport, but he just kind of brought it to a whole new level. And he was just able to pull off some stuff that, people, only the younger generation now are just now catching on to it, maybe 15 years later. So it's really, really fascinating stuff.
That's really cool. Yeah, that concept is blowing my mind. I don't think it's encouraged in many sports to actually like come up with different movements that other people haven't seen before. It makes sense for boxing and it makes sense for rock climbing, but I mean, I've been around professional rugby my whole life. My father's a rugby league coach, so like from the earliest days, I was going to training, and that concept has never come across my mind of like actually inventing different positions that are going to kind of confuse your opponent or give you new opportunities. But I can see it there now in players that I've worked with who've been very difficult for others to handle. It's cool that it's the crossover between. That's why these conversations are great. Where I'm not deep in the rock climbing world, but it's yeah, it's all movement, and it's all we're all humans. We're all solving problems physically. So love it.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing on that, because I love martial arts too. Bruce Lee's great. I read about Bruce Lee a lot in the Boulder, and where I find he was like a deep dude and obviously a top athlete, and just kind of like, all right, let's, I've always heard, kind of like, probably like typical. I read like quotes and I'm like, wow, that's a really cool quote, like be like water, all that kind of shit, right? All those quotes of flow like water, and and I was like, I read it up, for years, but I finally kind of like bought all his books and really dug deep, and what I saw in a lot of his like deeper philosophy was the fear of getting predictable, and he would say that his style was like a no style, and there's like a lot of weird contradictory terms in there, but basically like he had a big problem with formal training because what it did, it made you predictable to the opponent. And, so he like kind of, wanted to develop a way that was always ready to just react in the right way at the right time. So, I'm not going to always learn to punch, in a certain way, because, if my opponent knows I'm trained in that way, then he's going to know exactly how to defend. So if I'm never in those kind of habit ruts and so on, then I can break out of it and become less predictable. And I found that to be like really, really interesting. And he talks a lot about becoming, uncomfortable, is getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, because in order to break out of habit patterns, you have to deal with kind of the awkwardness of your body or the uncomfortable nature of what it really feels like to break those, bounds. And so he's just really good. He's great. He's got so much good, deep thinking about that stuff, and quick thinking. For him, it was so much about fluidity and being able to act really quick with the necessary reaction, whatever that was. So if it's like a field sport to come to rugby, if, you're going for a run and you got 5 guys looking at you, there's predictable patterns, and then there's the unpredictable pattern, and probably inside the unpredictable pattern or the unpredictable route, that's probably the best way to go. But it's hard to see that in a split second. It's really tough because it takes like a lot of intuition. It takes a lot of like real-time calculation of speeds of opponents, because you're like, all right, this guy needs to get here. I know that guy can get me there. This guy can get me there. But if I can like make that calculation really quick and have that bandwidth in my mind to run that program at a low level while my body is still fucking running as fast as it possibly can, then maybe that's my opening, and maybe that's what the top guys are. They're just already doing that. But they're just kind of naturals,
Yeah, for sure. They're for sure athletes are trying to be unpredictable, and they've got the option of this or that. But I don't know if that innovation is encouraged, and that concept in itself, I think, can potentially open new doors of thinking. For sure, the best guys are doing it. They are unpredictable, and they've got so much up their sleeve because they can execute all sorts of different plays in any one moment. Like that's what makes the best players so difficult, but to defend. But has the martial arts side for yourself? Have you gone down that path? Like philosophically, it's interesting for you, but do you do anything along those lines yourself?
I don't know. My closest I get to it is kind of just like a deep interest in Zen and like kind of martial arts training, and kind of like the way of life of like the kind of the Zen path has been always really important to me. And I know that that's like a big rabbit hole, but that's close to me. That informs a lot of my thinking about humility and letting go and kind of calming, being able to kind of work at an intuitive level with kind of like processes running lower. But no, I don't have, I've never, I did martial arts when I was young, but for such a small amount, it's not even worth mentioning, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's cool. Where are you at the moment with your own practice? What are you working on? How's your body? Yeah.
So the body's good, it's holding up, I feel like, the longer you're in the game, the more it just becomes about management, like injury management, as opposed to prevention. And so that's been like a really interesting point, just just seeing like how the body changes, right? And you need to learn how to adapt and things like that. And that's kind of it's been really fun. You get smarter as an athlete. I feel like the older you get, which isn't to say I'm a smart athlete, but I feel like you do get smarter, you do learn, and you learn to compensate for a lot of like the raw strength maybe we had in our late teens or early 20s. You definitely learn how to apply strength better and how to get more out of your muscles, which I think is really interesting. There's actually a lot of interesting studies that talk about muscle can basically fire on less cylinders the more with more cognitive processes that it's trying to run. So for instance, a distracted mind is actually less powerful in the body than a body is with no distraction. Maybe that came out weird, but long story short is they found that like people who are trying to run, for instance, around a track and like do math problems, can't run as fast as someone who's just trying to run around the track. Like you cannot let your body get consumed by all this stuff. And so I think, those are fun, like tricks that, take a while to learn, but, no, I'm just climbing, man. I got so many climbing projects, out there in the world. I'm working on a big crack project out in Moonlight Buttress in Zion that be going to within a couple of weeks. So I just been hitting the desert hard, doing a lot of crack climbing and, just shredding the body for sure. Just beating it up and trying to recover, eat well, typical stuff, stretch and stay limber. So yeah, that's kind of been the major shtick, but we got ice climbing season coming up, which is really fun. So I'm kind of about to transition into that and ski season, which is always good.
So it sounds like you got it covered year round. You got desert, you got ice, you got mountains. So there's no, and is the physical demands a lot different? Do you train differently for different seasons?
Yeah, that's a good one, man. Actually, definitely for sure. For instance, a lot of the summer I do a lot of like mountain running and a lot of like backcountry trail running, right? So like big mountain days. And my delts, my real shoulders go to shit. My biceps get tired because they're like swinging around for 10 and 12 hours. My quads get huge. My calves get huge, which is terrible for rock climbing. It's like what you don't want. So then I got to like try to create the new body. I got to be like, all right, I need to get rid of these legs. I need to get some power back. And, sometimes that transition can take weeks. But yeah, I've learned how to like toggle between those seasons a little better. But also I'm total ADD, man, which is a problem. And so I'm trying to do too much in like the different seasons. Sometimes it's just a disaster and you just get destroyed. Your body gets too tired and, you overdo one thing and then you stop that and you try to overdo the next. And it's just like the typical, athlete balance. But yeah, we're definitely forced to kind of move into seasonality and it keeps it fun, man. It keeps like burnout pretty low, which is, I think, important, like I really walk away from one thing when I sense my body getting burnt or like that the stoke isn't there, I just walk away. And I've learned that like, if you don't walk away, you are going to get injured and you're not going to like it. You're going to train with less intensity. It's just not worth it. Like if you love that thing, take a fucking break, go like do whatever you need to do, man, for a couple weeks. You got to replenish the inner stoke. Cause if that's not there, you'll never see the gains,
That's a good training philosophy, probably a good life philosophy as well. It's like, you gotta be excited about it. There's so many people aren't living a life that they're really passionate about. It's, you hitting the nail on the head with that. And it's cool, even though you love climbing, it's like, keep it fresh. If you're not excited about a certain move, a certain place, like move on, get excited, go again. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think people often in strength training maybe feel guilty about, I should stick with this program, even though I'm bored with it. I don't even want to work towards that goal anymore. It's like, well, maybe not. Like, yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's your body. I think that boredom is like your body. It's like your body trying to hijack you and like tell you like, dude, you need to take a break, and this is good because in my 20s, I just climbed year round. I mean, just as all I did was just climb hard stuff year round. And the injury cycles, looking back on it now, were just horrendous. And, now I feel like the literature is so much more precise about, taking breaks and, plateauing. And like, we didn't have that stuff. There was not much like widely available literature to be like, okay, after eight weeks of this or whatever that, you should take 2 weeks off. Like that stuff wasn't there. So we just would climb year round as hard as we could every day, as hard as you could, 365 days a year. I mean, that's a disaster. Like Kilian Jornet, famous, Spanish mountain runner, he takes like 6 months off the year. He doesn't put on his running shoes. He puts on his running shoes and he's dominant. He goes undefeated. He doesn't even run half the year. And he's pretty actually outspoken about that. He's like, yeah, I think so many runners out there they're just running year round and they're just grinding. And, they're developing what they call CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, which is like a real big problem. It's been written about in ultra running communities because there's this obsession that athletes get. Like we all get obsessed, right? We want to perform and we think that day off or that 2 weeks off, we're just going to go in the hole or we're going to miss those gains. It's still ingrained in my mind. I still think like that. And sometimes I'll still push it and I'm like, damn it, why'd I do that? But in the end, like you're way stronger for just like listening, man, and letting your body really recover, getting that stoke. You'll train harder. You'll come to training sessions more motivated, and you'll deal with those injury cycles. They'll just start to disappear, I feel like. So
there's always something to be excited about as well. Like shifting the excitement is a better way to look at it than stopping. He must have some other interests outside of running. The example that you gave there, like, yeah, I'm sure those 6 months aren't spent bored. He's probably a writer or a sculptor or something that he likes doing as well. It's a good way to look at it. And I think with movement, it's great to move between different projects. I've had times where I'm working on handstands, times where I'm working on snatches and weightlifting, and I'm glad to have all that stuff. Sometimes people are like, why don't you just work on one thing and get really good at it? Like, well, that's just not me. Like I like to, it's a challenge to go snatch 100 kilos, but then be able to do a 90-second handstand and then be able to do splits, or, I juggle and stuff like that as well. Like it's literally,
I love juggling.
Yeah, people think it's wacky. And it's, for me, it's better. And I think if gyms look more like that, people doing a bunch of different stuff and a more skill focus, people would have more fun there and it wouldn't feel like such a chore. And I mean, a lot of gyms kind of feel like a graveyard vibe. It shouldn't be like that. Yeah, rock climbing's a fun place. Circus is also a fun place in movement. My dream is that it all comes together a bit more, where the boundaries, I like seeing the boundaries come down and the conversations happen between different people, different backgrounds, and see what they can learn. The injury side of things, I'd love to touch on a little bit deeper. That's been a big part of my work the last couple of years. I'm a obsessive type person, like to go pretty hard at the things that I'm working on. And I had tendonitis for 20 years, different joints at different times. And then I found this man, knees over toes guy, the ATG system. And he had this system for his knees because he'd had multiple knee surgeries and he wanted to be a college, he wanted to go to the NBA. His role model was John Stockton. He was getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning when he was like 8 years old to go dribble his basketball. Like completely, he's the most obsessive person that I've come across. But he had multiple knee surgeries. He was having knee pain from 10 or something, and he had a lot of surgeries. And then he eventually did get recruited for Div 1 college as a 6'1", 6'2" white guy. So he's very, very good at basketball, but he had all these knee issues. And then he found the same strength mentor that I found, and he solved his knee stuff. And he went from being able to barely touch the rim to being able to throw down windmill dunks and just playing like an absolute freak. He plays one-on-one against NBA players, and he can hold his own. He doesn't get beaten in one-on-one, he says, as a 6'1" white boy. So
right on.
He had this system with knees, and I was like, oh man, like you've actually cracked something here that. And I've been studying strength for a long time and very, very passionate about it. I'm a rabbit hole kind of guy. And I was like, man, you've cracked this code here. This is really interesting. And what I found was that it actually tends to work for all the other joints as well. So he's been on Joe Rogan since. He's had like hundreds of thousands of people have done his program. And because I work with coaches, some of those coaches have been from rock climbing, and I've encouraged them like, hey, how do we use this for rock climbing? And so the methodology in a nutshell, and this is like really crudely, but the methodology is that you bring a lot of blood flow to the area without a lot of tension. So for the knees, it's like walking backwards up a hill, or it's dragging a sled backwards. And so it's a concentric action. So the eccentric tends to do more connective tissue damage, more muscle damage. It's concentric, which means muscle shortening. And then short range of motion where there's no stretch. And so you get a lot of blood flow in the area without stretching it and without doing eccentrics. And that in itself has been like a miracle for tens of thousands of people, like hundreds of thousands of people, like just walking backwards up a hill, walking backwards with a sled has been like, oh, my knees don't hurt now, and I can start doing something more advanced. Then you go into more bend, more stretch, and eventually it gets to like super stretch stuff. So he did the splits while he was on Joe Rogan as well. He's done dunk into splits on some of his content to get people's attention of like, this is possible. And so the other concept, to me, these are the two big concepts. One is the blood flow circulation, and the other one is that when you stretch something and you get it really strong in its most lengthened position, then that causes connective tissue adaptations that prepare us for plyometric stuff, like so more explosive movements. But they kind of like, he calls it like a bulletproofing reserve. They create like a bulletproofing reserve in the tissues. So I've been encouraging coaches of like, bring this to rock climbing. Like, how do you do short range? We call it short range when it's not stretched, and then long range when it's really stretched position. I don't know. Does anything come up for you with sort of hearing this and thinking about the remedies or what's worked for you with tendonitis? Because every climber's going to have at some point finger or forearm tendonitis, I would imagine, or it's common in the community anyway. Is anything coming up for you here thinking about these concepts?
Yeah, and no, it's super interesting to hear some of that stuff. I guess just thinking about injury for climbers, I would say 90% of the injuries that we get are like, from the wrist up. They're a lot of soft tissue, kind of typically like in your A1 pulleys, A2 pulleys, like right, literally like in your fingertips. I mean, that is like by far the most. That's kind of like pitcher's arm or pitcher or tennis elbow, right? That's kind of like the climber's equivalent.
So the last one?
No, the one that's above. Yeah, that first one there.
Yeah. Yep. I didn't know that the hand was so much more. I always thought, because when I go, like, it's always like the in the elbow there. If I go climbing, like that's where I get, because I'm probably not good enough to actually use the fingers. But it makes sense when you get more advanced, you're gonna be more aggressive with the fingers, and then they cop it.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly right. Like, so when you're starting off, you tend to be on like bigger holds where it's like full, what we call them jugs, like, they're good holds. And then you progress to get to be like what you call them, like finger buckets. So it's still pretty good, right? It's like kind of like your hand draping over a bar on the monkey bars. Yeah. But then the better you get, you start to hold smaller holds. And when you start to hold smaller holds, you start to really leverage those pulleys and which are like the minor connective tissue in the fingers. And so every climber is like within a couple of years going to get that injury, and then top climbers are going to get it. It's just like, it's our deal. But I guess just coming back to, what I'm thinking is like, so, I mean, blood flow is obviously huge for the hand because, tendons and ligaments have way less circulatory, whatever than muscle. So not only is it like the hardest to warm up, it's the thing that grows in strength out of balance to muscle. Like when, people go to the gym, you're a beginner, like you can do like, weighted pull-ups, put 75 pounds on my back, like all good. Right. So this guy should be like super strong, but you get him on something that's like a moderate and he's just falling all over the place. Right. Because it's not really that muscle. It's really those connective tissues in there. And so I would just be interested to see, like how that would connect, how that short range, motion would, and kind of blood flow would connect up in that. Cause I feel like that'd definitely be like a place of, where you could like exploit the most common injury. And I'm not quite sure how to do it. I'm kind of just like thinking out loud here with you.
Yeah. We can continue conversation a bit, and I'll connect up with some of the people that have been exploring this in the rock climbing world. Cause, it tends to be quite a universal solution, like definitely for like elbow tendonitis or Achilles, It's very effective, and it makes sense that it would work for the hands and as well. But there's less muscle, and so it will be really interesting. I haven't followed up enough. Like, I've had these conversations with people in rock climbing and different niches and said, like, hey, like, we really should test this. Like, I wonder what's going to happen. And I'm sure it's good for forearms. Like, I've experienced it and I've seen it happen, help a lot of people with forearms. But I don't know at all about hand. I haven't heard testimonials about hands. So maybe this podcast will help to pull some out, or at least encourage more exploration.
Yeah, I know forearm tendonitis. Like, so if you're looking at your right arm, for instance, the connective tissue at the bottom on the left side, on the kind of on the inside, that's a huge pain point for climbers in terms of like tendonitis. That's definitely like the number one tendonitis point for climbers. And there's all kinds of like things how to fix it. Whether it's like you take the frying pan and you kind of like twist up 90 degrees. That's a classic, and kind of reverse wrist curls are classic. But it tends to be an overuse injury a lot, I think. Then you're not strengthening your antagonist for sure,
Yeah. Muscle imbalance is part of it. And essentially it's always the tension has exceeded the tolerance of the tissue. So the amount of tension that is the tissue has been exposed to is beyond what the capacity of that tissue. So how do you increase the tolerance to tension, and then how do you bring your new life into the tendon? That's the thing in the stretching. I wonder, we need to go deeper in this conversation, maybe bring in one of the coaches that I've worked with, and explore it a bit further. But my guess and my feeling is that because rock climbing doesn't require you to work from a stretch position, like there's not really you don't tend. So then I think there'll be significant gains, and it's like you don't need it until you do need it, right? Like, people send me messages of like, hey, look at these parkour guys, like they don't do any of this stuff that you're talking about. It's like, yeah, they don't need to until they need to. It's like once the knees hurt, then parkour isn't necessarily going to be the solution to fix the knees. Like, it becomes tricky to. It's been cool because I'm just about to be 40, and now I can squat and jump and like in high volumes without getting issues. And even like I had the issues with doing chin ups and muscle ups and all that stuff, like basic gymnastics. I used to get those issues, and now I like using this sort of system of approaching. It's good. I don't mean to hijack the conversations jumped into my world quite a lot here, but I'm curious about that with rock climbing. We'll research it more. What's next in your research? Like, what's exciting at the moment? You sound like the person who's always got a rabbit hole that you're going down.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. Let's see. So I'm I guess, for the most immediate thing is really just my climbing goals. It's getting me stoked, right? It's just like, what are my athletic goals, and trying to raise kids, that are stoked about the mountains and are staying safe and not going out there getting buried in avalanches and doing dumb shit. So that's kind of like my, that's the physical part that's keeping me occupied. I got a son who's a total fucking maniac. Academic or, writing wise. So I'm writing a book called The Zen of Climbing, actually. And I mentioned Zen earlier. And, what I'm trying to do on this book is, I talk about climbing, but it's an approach to like all athletics, and it's all sport. And I think if, the boulder was interesting, the Zen of Climbing takes like some of the philosophy, but also takes like a little bit more of like a targeted, like practical manual approach. It's not like bullets and checklists of like mental strength. I find a lot of problems with like, the kind of modern article of, just like what mental strength is and, and all that stuff. I just found it to be a little like, shallow and problematic. And so I'm trying to, ante up and try to pull some weight and put my best foot forward as to say, like, this is what I think, mental preparation looks like for athletes. And, I'm reading samurai swordsmanship, philosophy. I'm reading books by Michael Phelps, Andre Agassi, reading stuff by the coaches of Serena Williams. I'm reading Apollo. I'm really just I'm trying to like figure out like what are all these common threads about mentality. And that's really vague, right? I'm sure every writer on sports has got like, they have their thing about it. But for me, it's like, it's really how to get to a place where you're able to do you're able to focus on that sport and that movement at the time that you need to. And I feel like to get there is so hard, right? Yeah, because you can't like arrive to the rugby pitch or arrive to, the gymnastics thing and be like, all right, I'm going to do these 5 things and like perform really great today. Like, it just doesn't work like that. I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to like, folks, that's like having a really shitty marriage and just like going to go home and like, hey, like, I love you. Like, it's all good, right? No, it's not. Like, you've got all this shitty history. Like, you've brought all this stuff. So what's the work like really look like for athletes to really tap into a place where they can perform cleanly, right? And like you have to reorganize your goals. Like, what does it mean to perform well? Does it mean to win, or does it mean to have like an unobstructed, performance that you're just like proud of, and what are some of the top Olympic coaches saying and all this other stuff. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about now. And it's been fun because I'm finding a lot of stuff that I can just bring into the fold, man. Like, I'm talking about climbing, but I'm talking about so many other things. I feel like half the time I'm talking about like boxing, Mike Tyson, surfing, you just kind of whatever. And I think that's the way my mind works. I just tend to not, I don't want to get like pigeonholed. I want to try to like blow it up into something bigger. So that's been really fun. That's been a really good project, and it's forced me to, not just talk philosophy, but to like give some directives. Like, all right, this is an exercise I think is like really important, that you should do, or this is what you need to take away. And this is where you need to look closer inside of yourself in order to get rid of like your hesitation, or to get rid of your sense of entitlement, or, things like that, which I feel like are just holding people back so much, whether it's too much self-worth invested in, their sport, or too much attachment to the goal, too much fear of failure. I mean, dude, fear of failure is a huge one. Like, there are athletes that are driven their whole career by just a fear of failing, and it's just crazy to think of how much better they could have been if they would have just gotten rid of that fear and turned it into something positive, and not competed from a place of worry and anxiety. It's just crazy. So
yeah, that's a really powerful one. I wanted to go to the Olympics as a hockey player, field hockey in Australia. Gretzky was actually a hero because it was the only hockey book I could find, even though it was ice hockey. It was like, well, I'll read it anyway. And so that was one of the first books I ever read. Was his?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
But but I remember like I was a very safe and defensive kind of player, and very like concerned about making any mistakes, and very much about like passing. And then it wasn't until later, when I realized I wasn't making teams and people weren't looking at me because I was too much on that side, that I was like started to take a lot more risks. And then I started to make teams, and I was like on the fringe of sort of the Australian system. But it was like literally what you just spoke about was that made all the difference for me. I didn't end up going to the Olympics. I went backpacking at 21 and kind of took a different path in life once I saw the world. But nice. Yeah, but it sounds like a powerful book, man. And that concept in itself of like encouraging people to get out of that safety mode, fear of losing, playing safe, versus getting after it and taking risks, innovating, inventing new positions, as you talk about, you spoke about earlier, like new movements. I love it. Looking forward to seeing the book come out. When are you thinking? That's probably a tough question, maybe.
No, it's let's see. So to be honest, like I'm polishing up the draft. I should be done within like 3 weeks. I'm just going to my final thing, and then it should come out earlier next year, I think. Yeah, something like that. Earlier next year is when it should come out. But I'm really stoked, man, because I just learned so much about other sport, just listening to tennis players, and there's so much stuff going on there in terms of internal dialogue of the athlete. Oh man, I found that to be such a cool route, is self-talk for the athlete. Like, what are the voices that we activate, man, when we're trying to do something hard? What is that voice saying? And like, why why does that voice come? And should we listen to that voice? Should we not listen to that voice? Like, when we say, all right, come on, man, you can do this. Like, what is happening when athletes say that? Because it's super common for athletes to get into that pep talk motion. But, there's very few coaches out there that I found, or even like high level coaches, that would be like, pep talk is good. Actually, it's a sign of kind of an impending disaster for an athlete. So if you find yourself having to like pep talk, what does that tell you? There's like a disjoint, right? Your personality is fragmenting, and you have these weird layers of doubt, confidence that you're having to like kind of hack in a word. You're having to like puff one part up. So anyhow, I just find those things to be like super interesting. And the psychology of sport, I feel like we're just entering the golden age,
Yeah.
We're just getting there. Like, we understand the body. We're starting to really dial in tissue connectivity and movement. Like, I feel like that's really good, but I feel like the psychology of performance is really we're just starting to get there. And it's really exciting.
I think it's a golden time for all of it. Like, I was just having that conversation just before with a coach who's working with different professional soccer players, just traveling around Europe, talking to them about how they're training and talking about how he was trained. Things have changed so much in the last 20 years, like with the internet and with being able to have these kinds of conversations. Movement is definitely progressing quickly, and there's a lot of innovative conversations and things going on. And psychology as well, sports psychology. It's really cool to explore, and we could definitely go deeper, on that. Maybe when your new book comes out, we can have another conversation. The mechanics of writing a book. Can you share a little bit of like your secret to actually getting it done? Do you have a ritual of time when you have to do it? Do you do it in chunks? What's your system?
Yeah, great question. So I think my philosophy of writing is kind of like my philosophy we talked about. Like, if you're not stoked on something, walk away, and have no fear that you might walk away. Like, that's okay. Like, because that's where your passion is directing you elsewhere, then go for it. So I don't like ritualize myself. I do give myself an hour to write every day when I'm feeling the most creative, and I try to accommodate that. I've learned that, when the day catches on, and if you're answering after a couple hours of answering emails or meetings or writing or whatever, or writing for work projects, then sometimes that stoke isn't there. So I've learned to protect that space a little better. I've learned that when you protect that space, you just become more productive, and it becomes a little bit more predictable. But I really, I don't have to force myself down to the keypad ever. And if I do, I just walk away for a couple of weeks, and sure enough, the wildfire, is on my doorstep really quickly again. And then I just kind of like manically pound stuff out.
Is that first thing in the morning then? Is that what you're saying, that you do it before you get emails and everything, or generally?
Yeah, I try to definitely keep my mind clear before the day has its wear on the creative mind. Yeah, I definitely try to write earlier than later for sure. Yep. I find that to be, I've just found over years I'm more productive, and my ideas are better, my sentences are better. So I kind of like that. I also juggle a lot of different kind of stuff. Like, I write fiction, and I write articles, a lot, and op-eds. So if I'm like, I'll put a book down for 2 weeks, and I'm like, all right, I'll write this thing for whatever, New York Times, whatever. No, then I'll write that, and then I'm like, okay, good. Now I can go back to this other thing with a fresh pair of eyes. So I wouldn't say I have really any remarkable process for writing. I've just always loved it as much as I have climbing and athletics, I've just loved it. And it just always come to me, since I was probably 14 or 15. And I can't say I can take any credit for it, to be honest. I'll take no credit for it. It's just kind of a compulsion that's there, I don't know what to do with it,
You'll go with your compulsions and do the things that kind of naturally come to you, and you almost feel as though you're cheating, or you can't take credit because it's just what you're meant to be doing. I think if more of us, it's not necessarily like follow your passion, but we all have things that we're drawn to, where if we go deeper with it, we can provide value. And you are providing value with your writing, and it makes use of your interest in climbing. And it's also really cool to see that you're sort of passing that on and having those experiences in nature and stuff as well. Like the content that you're sharing is really cool. It's the family experiences that you're having around that, which we didn't get into as much today. But yeah, I love what you're doing, and your writing has had an effect on my community. And yeah, look forward to sort of continuing the conversation and maybe doing some climbing with you at some stage. I'd love to get back to Colorado. It's such a beautiful part of the world. Yeah, my son was actually spontaneously climbing today, which is quite funny. When we had this conversation, he's like, I want to climb up there, and he just climbed up one of the walls just around the corner here. So yeah, appreciate your time so much. Thank you for the outstanding book that you've written, and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I really enjoyed talking with you, dude. It was so good. I feel like we were just eye to eye on so many things, and yeah, I agree. There's so many more things we could go on. So yeah, I just really appreciate the ability to talk with you, and let's definitely rope up anytime, man, for sure. Let's make it happen.